I really didn't want to make this video. Isn't that the dumbest start to a video ever? I hate when YouTubers say that, because it's just a lie. Of course you wanted to make this video, otherwise you just wouldn't have made the video. The appropriate thing to say is, although I had doubts about making this video, I still think the positives outweigh the negatives, but that's not as catchy, is it? Anyways, I was genuinely conflicted on making this because I have a whole lot of love for Ralph's earlier content. Considering that he is roughly the same age as me, I related very hard to the trajectory that his opinions in YouTube videos followed. I too was an angsty teen who was livid with the lack of creativity that mainstream media was providing in their tentpole products. I too made short films with my friends and submitted them to film festivals, even winning a couple of awards for doing such. I too had a cynical mindset about the state of cinema and university. Eventually, however, people change and progress, and it's very evident that Ralph has evolved as a creator. Except in this case, it's more like devolving. I am not making this video in order to draw any negative attention towards Ralph. This is just one of the more interesting arcs on the site that I've ever seen, and I really don't see that many people talking about it. So in this video, I will be going over 3 specific events that I personally believe goaded Ralph into becoming the shell of his former self that you see in his current videos. Without further ado, this is... I found Ralph's channel through his Smosh the Movie video getting recommended to me shortly after it came out in late 2015, and really started to get into his stuff with his Minions review at the beginning of the next year. So when I went on a binge of all of his content after his Minions review, I naturally stumbled across his 2 short films, The High and King Candy. As I said previously, he had mentioned that he had even won some awards for King Candy, and that definitely had me interested. So I saved the 2 short films for last, and after I watched them, I was rather torn. You see, I'm never going to hold back on my criticism of a project, no matter who it's coming from. 4 years of writing workshops will turn you into a hardened man, and that is exactly what happened to me. King Candy is the one that people often refer to as the better of the 2, and it got more attention than The High, so I will only be addressing that one specifically here. Frankly, it sucked. The cinematography is horrendously flat and static. The dialogue is tragically dumb. The color grading looks like someone working with Photoshop for the first time in their lives, and the acting is, for lack of a better term, horseshit. You know what though? None of that matters because it is a film made by a high schooler. Aside from a very, very rare exception, you won't find a better film made by a high schooler than this. Attempting to grade a high school film on a scale with actual movies is idiotic beyond belief, so instead I look for 2 things in films like King Candy. Those 2 things are ambition and potential, and it's undeniable that King Candy has an abundance of both of those qualities. The plot, while sloppily put together and very clearly influenced by Scorsese, is a nice twist to a classic formula, and Ralph obviously knows how to, without being sarcastic, put a movie together. Sure, that movie that he put together was terrible, but most high schooler films don't even have the bare bones essentials to qualify as a movie. As much as King Candy sucks, it has a coherent story that makes sense and an intriguing main character who goes through an actual arc. That is commendable, especially at such a young age, and over time that potential and ambition can be molded into real skill and talent. So it's no surprise that when I saw the trailer for his film Lover, which raised over $10,000 on Kickstarter, and it looked infinitely better and more interesting than either of his previous short films, I got pretty excited. It had been 3 years since he had released his last project, and there was actual backing behind this, which Ralph used to buy a professional camera and equipment. The score was on point, the voiceover monologue from Ralph was delivered exquisitely, and the interspersed saturation changes were eye-catching. There was a lot to be excited about, and I was. Then, 2 years later, the movie actually came out, as the initial trailer was released in 2016 and has since been deleted from his channel for some reason. So, what improvements did Ralph make? After all, at this point he is in college, and although student films are generally bad, I have seen some genuinely talented people make some pretty alright shorts in my time in university, and I didn't even go to a D1 school. With the potential that Ralph had shown through his previous student films, combined with the fact that he had a budget behind him and an increased critical eye for easy mistakes to avoid through his deconstruction of bad films, there's no way he couldn't put all of that together to make at least a mediocre directorial debut. Right? Lover is awful, and it's the worst type of awful too. Instead of learning from some of his mistakes and deficiencies in his previous projects, he just made the decision to attempt and make everything look artsier. The cinematography is still as stagnant as it's always been, but let's add a black and white filter to make it look deeper. Ralph still can act, but the dialogue is more staccato and accentuated to make it seem more important than it actually is. All of that equipment that he used from his budget, and it wasn't a scam, he did actually buy a high-grade camera, is unrecognizable as the quality looks nearly identical to King Candy just in black and white. I even bought the thing on opening night on Amazon for $1 or something, and I still feel ripped off. Now, while most of his fans on sites like Letterboxd and IMDb responded relatively positively to the film, the same cannot be said about the response seen on YouTube. There are a multitude of videos absolutely lambasting both the film and Ralph into oblivion. Side note, my favorite one is by a group called Uncle Mickey Productions that I would highly recommend. All of their videos are really solid, especially their top 10 films of the year videos. They're super unique, and God, I would like to collaborate with them someday. Getting back on track, there is an actual reason that he received this kind of flag, and that is because the veil of potential and confidence had been removed to reveal someone who is pretentious and can't back up his own words. A through line of his reviews would be him saying, "I'm not saying the movie I'm making right now with only $10,000 is better than this movie that I'm talking about, but it is." So after making a plethora of comments like this about multi-million-dollar films, only to come out with something much worse than all of those films he took jabs at, the pushback was definitely warranted. This was the first time that Ralph had received more than a modicum of hate from his own community, and it would be the only spike of hate he would receive until roughly a year later, when the next nail in the coffin was hammered in by the swift hands of the internet. If you were involved in the online film community in the fall of 2019, then you remember how big of a deal Joker was when it premiered at Venice Film Festival, where it received the Golden Lion, one of the most prestigious awards in the film world, and got an 8-minute standing ovation. Although those are both things that should be taken seriously, it wouldn't have been nearly as big a deal if it had not been for the amount of hate it also received, with people like David Ehrlich from IndieWire, one of the most prominent film critics on the planet, calling it a toxic rallying cry for incels, with other establishments like Vulture and Time backing the sentiment. It was clear from its earliest screenings that Joker was going to be one of the most divisive films of the year, and perhaps of the decade, and it was. When the film came out in October, you couldn't avoid the discourse about it if you were even remotely immersed in the online film community. There were extreme takes being thrown out left and right everywhere you looked, and everyone wanted to be involved in conversations about it with their whole chest, regardless of whether they knew what they were talking about or not. The right was praising it as one of the most brilliant takes on mental health in the modern landscape of cinema ever. The left was chastising it as a shallow and masturbatory film that didn't really say anything at all, and was an overall negative addition to the world of film. And normal people were busy caring about things that actually mattered. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, Ralph decided to throw his hat into the ring and released his own review of Joker. When I saw it in my subscription feed on a late night drive back from school on the way to McDonald's, I was actually really excited. If there was anything that Ralph really had a handle on, it was taking apart superhero or superhero related films and pinpointing the exact facets that make it either sink or swim, with the more common occurrence being the former. That being said, when I pulled into the parking lot to gorge myself myself on trash food, I wasn't expecting to also be gorging myself on trash content as well. Listen, Ralph has never been the most organized and systematic reviewer on the website, but he had and has never come close to sounding as all over the place as he did in his Joker review. I sat there with a McDouble in my hand, observing all of his hastily put together points fly past me at such a rapid rate that it gave me whiplash. When I went down to the comments section, I was pretty shocked to see that he was getting absolutely harangued. There were an excess of viewers going after both the actual video and his opinion on Joker itself in lengthy paragraphs that already had thousands of likes within the first 12 hours of the video being posted. As the days went on, the backlash eventually spread to a bunch of video responses to Ralph's review, which got some pretty solid viewership on them. It was evident that this would be the first notable negative mark on his resume, and it has remained there to this day, with people constantly bringing it up whenever discussing Ralph. And frankly, this is an absolute shame for one reason and one reason only. Ralph's take on Joker wasn't even that bad. A majority of the points that he brings up about the film and the fan base surrounding it at the time are pretty on the nose. Is Joker kind of an amalgamation of other much better films, including a few Scorsese properties? Yes. Was the hype overblown to the point where fanboys were coming up with completely asinine theories that only had a crumb of relevance to the actual plot in order to make the film seem more important and deep than it actually was? Yes! Is Todd Phillips a hack fraud in every sense of the word? 1,000,000%. The problem is that instead of presenting these points in a more formal and logical manner, Ralph threw together what seemed to be a very rushed review that was also emotionally driven, which is never a good combination. It's apparent that some of his Scorsese favoritism bleeds into his Joker review, and it comes off as rather personal, which is fine. He's allowed to have bias towards a film style or filmmaker. The issue is that he also belittles the people who have a bias towards the film he's reviewing a myriad of times, which is never a good thing to do when you're attempting to come off as a voice of reason, which from my perspective, Ralph definitely views himself as. The review was ultimately deleted off of his channel, but he's still getting clowned in the comments of the re-upload to this very day. Once again, I think this whole section is a bit of a shame, because I think if he simply took a bit more time on the video, the whole sub-point against him wouldn't even exist. But alas, he didn't, and it does. His cynicism against the fan base and DC as a franchise really got to him, which is funny because I remember a point in time where Ralph wasn't the cynical and monotonous creator that we see now. Huh. I wonder what could have changed. Alright, here we go. Before you get on your keyboard typing your defenses at the speed of light, at least let me get off my points. In case you somehow don't know, Sardonicast is a podcast hosted by three figureheads of the film criticism genre: Your Movie Sucks, I Hate Everything, and Ralph. The show started in 2018 and has been ongoing for the past 4 years or so, with consistent uploads every week-ish. First, let me get my biases briefly out of the way so all my cards can be laid out on the table. I hate YMS, I like IHE, and you can kind of get a sense of how I feel about Ralph. So, what does this really have to do with the decline of Ralph's content? Well, in the very first episode of the podcast, the three are going about the standard introductory phase of any first episode of anything, and when YMS gets around to explaining the name, he says this: I'm only reading this with the needless bits cut out because I'm not downloading a 2.5-hour podcast on mediocre Wi-Fi. It's essentially a more morbid or depressing kind of negative version of sarcasm, and I thought about that, and I realized that our channels kind of inhibit that more so than a lot of other channels do. When I heard this for the first time listening back in 2018, when I was still at least somewhat of a fan of all three of them, I found myself a tad confused, as I didn't think that description fit all three. YMS definitely has a sardonic nature to his videos, as his name is literally Your Movie Sucks. The driving force behind his main source of content is to pick apart very bad movies for the lulz and by God is he great at doing that. IHE also has a sardonic tone to his stuff once again, seeing as his name is literally I Hate Everything. Aside from a couple of his videos, the whole channel revolves around talking about his disdain for things in pop culture in a more subjective way than YMS. Then there's Ralph, and 2018 me was like, what? Yeah, Ralph's content has always been based around negativity, but there's something that prohibits me from putting him in the same boat as the other two. Whenever Ralph tackles a film or show, most of the time there's a reason behind it other than product bad. Instead of a hardened cynic harping on all of the cheap tricks that filmmakers shove in the audience's faces, Ralph comes off as a film school student with the sole interest of getting his thoughts out there in order to express his frustrations about the state of cinema in general. His reviews show a level of empathy for filmmakers in the greater system that they have found themselves in that the other two lack, for better or for worse. Instead of solely focusing on what doesn't work about the properties he takes a stab at, he tries to provide solutions in a constructive manner. I definitely think that the main reason for this is his goal to one day be a part of the very same industry he criticizes, hoping to one day be a part of the change from the inside instead of the outside. Flash forward to the present day, and that description seems like a distant memory. There is almost zero energy or interest in Ralph's reviews, and that flame that I saw earlier in his career has completely died. He sounds as bored and monotone as the actors in the films he's making fun of. Instead of making up jokes and delivering insightful comments about the things he's watching, he just lets the films speak for themselves. It's like watching a basketball game and the commentators see Ja Morant posterize the opposing team and they say, wow, he dunked the ball. It's difficult to watch, and it makes me wonder how he got to this point, which brings us back around to Sardonicast. This point is just pure speculation with absolutely nothing to base it off of other than logical deduction, so keep that in mind. From my perspective, Ralph, who is the least popular of the trio by a long shot, saw the formula the other two used working effortlessly and attempted to mold his style towards something more their speed, failing to realize the energy that made him stand out from the pack was exactly why people enjoyed his content so much in the first place. Or he just lost his passion for doing what he does, but honestly, the fact that I can't tell which is kind of scary. Alright, Ralph, it's time to have a heart-to-heart. You've done this in some of your old videos, and I think there's a higher chance that you see this than they see the video you've made about their film, so I thought it might be helpful. Believe it or not, this isn't a hit piece at all. I'm expressing my concern in an area that I would like to be in someday, which is YouTube. I'm not going to be a suck-up like most people on this website, so that's why you got what you got. I've watched you interviewed on multiple different podcasts, and I need to stress that you actually do seem like a good guy. That does not change the fact that your content for the past year or so has been trash that your past self would make fun of. It's a possibility that this is just an organic part of your evolution as a creative, and if that's the case, then I don't really have much to say other than good luck on the rest of your career. If that's not the case, however, then here's my advice, regardless of whether you want it or not. Breathe. Take all the time in the world that you need to get back that fire. Your fans will still get content from you on Sardonicast, and your channel is far too big to die. Cultivate a healthy environment where you can feel comfortable sitting down and making the high-effort content that puts you on the map in the first place. You are a really talented guy, and I'm truly rooting for you. All the best, Colin Andrews.